Good evening. We'd like to call our meeting to order. Ms. Steele, if you please call the roll.
Mr. Gibson?
Here.
Dr. Orth?
Here.
Mr. Hutson?
Here.
Mr. Smith?
Here.
Mr. Chriscoe?
Here.
Mr. Bazzani is not, and Mr. Nicosia.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Steele. At this time, we'll have our invocation and our pledge of allegiance by Dr. Orth.
Heavenly Father, we are in the season. We have much to be thankful for. We have a dedicated and hardworking volunteer fire and rescue squad, a sheriff's department who puts their lives on the line each and every day to keep us safe, a school system with wonderful teachers who have made our schools one of the best in the region and nation, and so many others who volunteer for so many worthy causes. But let us never forget so many of our fellow men, women, and children who struggle each and every day with financial and medical conditions beyond their control. Let us keep them in our thoughts and prayers during this Thanksgiving time. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Dr. Orth. Approval of the minutes. No minutes available. Adoption of the agenda.
So, second.
Moved and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Approval of the consent agenda.
So moved. Second.
Moved and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, matters presented by the board.
I think we should recognize the girls field hockey team that won the state championship on Saturday and beating Loudoun County after having lost to them twice. So that's quite an honor for these young ladies. Wonderful. Wonderful. Very good.
Mr. Chriscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Myself, Mr. Nicosia, Ms. Steele, and Ms. Calloway had the privilege to attend the VACO conference, and just wanted to touch on briefly that financially, the state's looking pretty good. It's going to be interesting to see how we go about dispersing this money that the state currently has and what's going to come with the next General Assembly. But the other thing I wanted to mention was that, Mr. Smith, you were missed at the meeting. Some people were asking about you. Just wanted to make sure you're aware of that. And they gave me well wishes for you.
Thank you, sir. Yep. Any other matters presented by the board? No other matters presented by the board. County administrator items.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to introduce that we have Regine Biggers with us tonight, and maybe if she'll stand. So you see she is our new Deputy County Administrator, and we are just delighted that she's here and expect big things for her and a long tenure. So, long, happy tenure. Yes. Thank you. Some other meeting announcements. Tomorrow night, there is going to be the second Gloucester High School, at Gloucester High School from 5 to 7 will be the second VDOT meeting where you can go and look at the plans of potential things that may become grant applications sometime in the future. And then we have the retreat at the Department of Social Services, the board retreat at 9 a.m. on Saturday. And then there were a lot of people who came out to the Planning Commission and mentioned about potentially coming to the Board of Supervisors December meeting for the Tide Mill Townhomes subdivision, and wanted to make sure the public was aware that they have withdrawn their application, so that will not be on the agenda for that night. There is also a good bit of interest that we're hearing, so I want to make sure the public is aware that on Thursday, December 4th, the Planning Commission will be hearing and having a public hearing on the proposed Fox Mill subdivision. And I think that is it. Thank you. A lot of meetings. Yes, sir.
Since the media is here, can they make sure you mention that has been withdrawn so people don't come for December about the Tide Mill subdivision? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Steele. Okay, public comment period. Limited to topics on the work session agenda only. Any public comments?
Well, Since Mr. Smith has already said that he always follows the Constitution and we have unrestrained freedom of speech, I just want to say one sentence briefly. I'm hearing that they have not given up on the project at Tide Mill Road yet. I hope that that is not true. Thank you.
Any other public comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to our work session agenda. Historic Building Preservation Discussion, Mr. Matt Barber, Parks, Recreation, and Tourism Director, Andrew Marshall.
I just want to introduce Andrew Marshall. I think most of y'all were here for the tour earlier, but he's been the county's contractor for all the historic preservation work here we've done in the court circle, and he works for MTFA Architecture. So, Andrew, you can take it away. He's going to give a kind of a presentation on kind of the stuff we talked about earlier, but any additional information y'all want to hear.
Thanks, Matt. Hi, everybody. Great to see the friendly faces from earlier and as well as the new faces. So if you were at the tour, please forgive me. I'm going to say a lot of the same things, but I think it's worth everybody being on the same level so that everyone's aware. So first of all, I just want to say it's been a real pleasure, and in a lot of ways, courthouses in Virginia are one of my passions as a preservation architect and architectural historian. So being able to work on your truly unique site is really, really an honor. There's a great team here with the county staff. Carol Steele obviously leading a lot of that and who's done so much work in helping to understand the history of Court Circle and the Botetourt building, which has been so foundational to the work that we've been able to build off of. So many thanks to her, many thanks to Matt and everybody, and Robert and everybody else who's contributed to this effort. So what we've been working on is a condition assessment report. We're at the 95% draft stage of it, and we're working towards the finalization. We are currently concluding a series of investigations that came out of recommendations of the draft report to really truly get to the understanding of some of the treatment recommendations that we think are really critical to help preserving the 6 buildings in the court circle, its landscape, as well as the Botetourt building and its landscape. This is an extremely unique courthouse site with the arrangement being encircled. There's no other one like it in the state. I've been to all of the courthouses in the state. It's truly unique. I also like to say that, you've got a really amazing collection of similarly scaled and similarly buildings built out of the same material that really serves as kind of a exhibit of American architecture from the colonial period all the way through the 20th century. So just to make sure as a preservation architect and architectural historian, this is really a special place, and I really hope that some of what we recommend comes to fruition. So with that, I will get into the presentation. So this is just a team. Just to give a little background on our team, we do many things at MTFA Architecture, but we have a core team of preservation people that work solely in preservation. All my work is on historic buildings. And we have architectural conservator, director of preservation, as well as a series of really talented and specialized consultants that contributed to the work that we're doing. We came, just some background, we've spent, I'm trying to remember how many days we spent here, Carol, but I've probably spent on and off 7 or 8 days pouring around, crawling around attics, looking underneath floors, anything I can get to. That's kind of the dream. When I walk out of a building filthy, I know I had a good day. Anyway, so what we've taken from those observations is we've augmented that with a brief historical narrative in the report, and then condition assessment to outline the key things that we found, and then we've made recommendations to resolve the items that we found that were either deficient or creating some other type of issue with the building's longevity. And to be clear about what the focus of the report is, it's to really preserve the buildings for decades to come. This work needs to be aligned with a future master plan that really grapples with how will these buildings be used. So the work that we've done there will be additional work alongside of just the mere preservation. But what is the additional work in the future that will need to be to bring these buildings into full use for what the county's vision for them are? So this is kind of a foundational document that will be built off of. So now I'm going to go building by building and just kind of touch on some key issues that are affecting the building currently. Either typically when we do these, we always work from outside in because we want to make sure that we are prioritizing the issues, right? If you don't have a secure and stable envelope, then it's going to bleed into your interior. So we always start from outside in, and we want to make sure that structure as well is another key issue. So as we've prepared this report, we've also arranged those recommendations in priorities. And so, our plan is, we've been working with the county to identify what are the most urgent items so that the money is spent. Any money that's spent on preservation is spent dealing with the most urgent items right away. Looking at the Colonial Courthouse, the building we're in now, which was initially constructed in 1766 and of course has undergone many alterations throughout its history. The first big one is really a complex web of issues that are about the exterior envelope. So part of the issue, what we have is we have an exterior wall that is extremely porous and intentionally so. The hand-molded bricks that make up the exterior walls allow moisture easily through it. Affecting that brick was in the mid-20th century, the exterior was sandblasted. So typically this is a very major issue with a brick building when you sandblast. Through analysis that we've done, we've actually been able to understand that it's not quite as severe as in other buildings because you have extremely porous brick all the way through. You don't have a traditional hard outer layer and then kind of a softer inner layer. So it's in some ways, a blessing what you have. And then we've also analyzed the mortar, which is also very porous. And so the problems that are occurring is that the work that's been done on the interior is not porous, does not breathe. And historic buildings are meant to breathe through the wall. We now think of in modern buildings as sealing that exterior, but historically they knew they couldn't do that. And so they allowed these buildings to breathe. And what we routinely see when we work on historic buildings is that envelope at some point has been sealed in the wrong spot, and it creates deterioration somewhere in the assembly. And so what we've got here is behind this wainscoting is actually a cementitious coating that's been applied, which is not breathable. Again, so that's trapping moisture inside that brick. And then above, it's hard to tell, but there's a line where it switches from drywall to plaster. And behind that drywall is plastic. So again, another layer of non-breathable systems. And then we are standing on a concrete floor. Traditionally, this was a vented crawl space due to termite damage that had to be replaced. And so that concrete is then pushing that moisture into that wall, which then wants to be able to dry out but cannot. So that's really the series of exterior envelope issues. So you can see in these images the sandblasted brick on the left, and then you can see a picture of various repairs throughout time, and then the 1907 alterations, which added the portico out front, and then added the beadboard ceiling that you can see above the suspended ceiling. Also installed cast stone sills, which themselves are cracking and causing other deficiencies, allowing more moisture into the assembly. Other items is just general building systems upgrades. As the long-term picture of understanding what the courthouse wants to be, obviously these rooms are used for systems. Is that the right answer? That's a long-term question. They obviously inhibit use of those space for other items, and nor does the mechanical system control for humidity, which that itself compounds with the moisture infiltration that I was talking about. And then there's plumbing access. That the restroom over there is quite small, does not meet current code. And then what state are the ductwork that supplies this actually or returns it actually goes underneath the concrete slab. So what state is that in? Obviously at some point that will deteriorate and need additional work. And then the big question, which I've kind of hinted at, is what period does this building want to be restored to in a future renovation, restoration? We've had lots of debate about, it's called the Colonial Courthouse, but there were serious major renovation periods that in some ways have removed significant aspects of that colonial fabric. And so really much of what we see is a combination of 1766, 1907, and 1956. And so there's a series of decisions that need to be made about how far back does this go. One of the biggest ones is just simply the arrangement of the building. If you see this series of floor plans from the different periods that was drawn by architects at Colonial Williamsburg, the first period, the building was originally arranged in a traditional partie or plan, where when you entered the courthouse, the judge would be immediately in front of you. In the 1907 arrangement, that reoriented the courthouse to become lateral. So now the judge is to the right. And then the 1956 removed the dais and then obviously flip the dais on this side. And so there's a series of questions about that. Obviously, you've got the 1907 ceiling, you've got the 1907 portico. So really, there's a complex web of questions about when a big restoration happens to this building or a big investment happens to this building, even if it's not solely focused on restoration, those questions still need to be asked so that work that's being done doesn't require undoing in the future, but is really conducive to future work that you can build on. And so that's a key point of how we like to think, is that if we make a recommendation, it can be built upon. It doesn't need to be undone in future work. That's a big thing, so that you're spending the money efficiently and effectively for the future. Looking at the Clayton building from 1823, it was a clerk's office originally. It's got a really interesting attic floor. It actually was fireproof, so you've actually got 2 courses of brick on that attic floor. It's one of the several fireproofed attics that you have in this circle here. Here, key issues are brick masonry deficiencies, impact of later alterations, and then restoration and renovation of the interior flooring. Starting with the brick, repairing the brick is really complicated by the application in the 20th century of what we believe to be a Portland cement-based stucco. And so a Portland cement-based stucco does not allow the masonry to breathe again, so that's trapping moisture and is creating some of the damage that we see. So you can see cracking in the image of the left along the corner. That's really to be expected as a building moves, that cracks happen at corners and at window heads, like you see in the image on the lower left, window and door heads. And then you can see in the image of the upper right how this stucco is starting to fall off, but one of the challenges is you can't just go and rip this off. This will rip the face of the brick off if you go to try to take it off, mechanically without extreme care. And so we don't want to do that, because that will affect the porosity of that wall, likely creating a lot of damage to the interior plaster. Again, later alterations are a big thing. And again, that's why we're trying to do work that is conducive to both preservation but can be built upon in our recommendations. So you see here on the image on the left, really 2 big later alterations that are featured, which is the application of the stucco and then the construction of that brick chimney, which is no longer used. And then the image in the middle, you can see the faux slate shingles that were installed, essentially creating a mismatch with the natural slate shingles that are on 3 of the other buildings. And then the image on the right is the rear of the building. You can see the coating that's on the walls, that kind of gray to the sides of the image. And then you can see the cast stone sills, but also just sort of the mismatched nature of some of these alterations over time. And then on the interior, we've got the image on the right is this beautiful stone floor that's historic to the building. And then you've got brick floor that's in the left-hand, or I guess if you're looking at the front of the building, the right-hand room, but in the left-hand image. And then that was obscured for a period of time. You can see the level of the paint on the base trim in the image on the left. So conduit is actually now currently running on top of the floor, creating a hazard really to being able to use the building in its current arrangement. So there's some big questions about how to manage that. And then that stone floor itself also needs attention because of some of the moisture that's coming up through the floor. Moving on to the Roan building, another clerk's office. This one built in 1896 by the most prolific public builder in Virginia's history, B.F. Smith Fireproof Construction Company. He did several courthouses, many clerk's offices, many jails throughout the state. He was a very effective salesman. Key issues here are the deterioration of the steel windows and doors. As I joked while we were out there earlier, Wes's good work painting the windows recently is really hiding a lot of corrosion and a lot of deterioration. Also managing the moisture in the exterior walls, and then HVAC system improvements. So these are images before it was painted. These steel windows are really unique. The double hung, meaning sash windows like you have here, in steel and made out of steel, only were built for a very small period. They quickly moved to casement windows because steel windows don't work as well as wood. They don't have the give. You know, you essentially have an extremely hard material against another extremely hard material, whereas wood has a little play and can fit well with one another. So you've got a really unique, small, limited period that these types of windows were actually executed. So losing them would be a real shame from a preservation standpoint. They also have these beautiful shutters. All of these contributed to the fireproof nature of the building. The moisture in the exterior walls is really compounded by the soils plus the nature of the exterior assembly. You've got a unique cavity wall building, a unique cavity wall in that building where you've actually got an interior cavity that is creating some of the problems that we see. It's allowing moisture to linger inside the wall. And so that is creating that mortar erosion and spalling of that brick right in the center of the image. And so that tells you that the moisture is coming through that mortar and bringing it with it. It's constantly there. There's a real clear datum when you look at the exterior of that building where that moisture is rising to and then evaporating through the wall and damaging the wall as a result. And then you can see how, where it can, it's moving through the interior and deteriorating the plaster as well. Again, I should say this is compounded by its concrete floor. Concrete floors are bad for historic buildings. It's one of the things we always struggle with. And then the HVAC systems. So again, how can they help address this cavity situation where we're holding moisture, where we're not allowing the building to breathe? So that's another way. How can we control for humidity? It's really a challenge in a lot of these buildings. Moving over to the old jail from 1873, we've got the exterior brick masonry repairs, window restoration and interior improvements. One thing I'll make a note of that I said outside is that for much of this building's history, it was painted white or whitewashed. So it really stood out from the other buildings. And I also think part of that likely was could have been, we see it often, so it's a sort of assumption on an educated assumption on my part, that it may have been painted as a result of the quality of the masonry, that the brick is lower quality and the paint helped limit water infiltration as a result. But it certainly, for much of its history, stood out as a unique building in Court Circle as a totally white building. Some of the brick damage that we see, especially on the rear, we've got a serious vertical crack moving through the wall, demonstrating movement in that wall, and there's a number of other cracks, a number of spalled bricks as well. The windows, especially on the rear of the building, again, south-facing usually gets more issues because you get hot and cold, whereas the north has a more stable environment. But that south-facing, those windows are in deleterious shape. You know, you can see that wood is heavily rotted. The bottom rail of that window is toast. So those would need full restoration or, sensitive, sympathetic replacement. And then interior improvements. The image on the right shows the central stair, and you can see the evidence of a lot of the modern alterations that haven't been fully removed. And so I think, the interior of the jail really needs to be augmented by that master plan. How does this building want to be used? What purpose can it serve? Is it going to be interpreted? Is it going to be used in another way? And that ultimately needs to be thought of holistically, all of these buildings together, so that you can spend your money effectively and efficiently. And then on the image on the left shows the public restrooms, which are certainly showing their wear and tear and their age. Moving over to the debtor's prison from 1824. This one has one of the more concerning conditions, which is the first one on the first bullet here, which is the displacement of the northwest corner, brick masonry deficiencies generally, and then looking at some limited interior improvements. As I said out there, sorry to keep repeating that, but I believe this might be if you will, the newest debtor's prison in the state of Virginia. I think this was one of the last ones built. The law soon changed about a decade after this, where people stopped imprisoning debtors. But anyway, it stands as a really unique one, and there's some really interesting comparisons to other ones, say in Northampton County, which has a very similar finished interior. Here's an image of that displacement. I don't know how clear it is, but it's pretty easy if you go over there and look. You can see how really what's happening is that corner is starting to turn away from itself, and you can see you've got about a 3/4 inch to an inch ledge where that's moved. That's highly concerning. So what that's telling you is that the building is not stable and that it is actively moving. So as a part of the most recent investigative efforts, we did a test pit to observe the foundation condition and arrangement, and then we looked at also the soils conditions and did a geotechnical boring. And what we found is that the building doesn't have a footing, which is normal and to be expected for a historic building. Simply the brick walls go down about 18 inches below grade and stop. So they don't have a traditional spread footing, which really helps spread out all that weight and help float on that soil. And what we found in the soils was that it sits on about 2 feet of topsoil and then about 7.5 feet of organic fill. So that tells us of some activity there, either preparing the site to sort of create a level, or perhaps it was a landfill, as we talked about earlier. And so, but what ultimately that means is that soil is decomposing and will continue to move. So in order to stabilize that corner, you have got to get past that about 10 feet to stabilize that wall so that it stops moving. Other masonry issues, you can see heavy mortar erosion on the chimney there. That moisture actually was getting, moisture gets in through that mortar loss, and that was actually the site of some heavy carpenter ant activity when we were on site, and that has been addressed by county public works staff. But when you get water in, water's your enemy, right? If water's getting in, that's going to either attract bugs, rot, or other damage. And then the image on the right shows the lint. The brick is not stable and actually is sagging as it spans that window. It's really relying on that wood frame to help span it. But you can see the movement in that brick there. And then just to look at the interior, this building offers the most immediate opportunity for interpretive potential to really access and tell the story of what it was like to be imprisoned as a debtor. And there's really only limited improvements such as removing modern alterations, but really it's a pretty effective space. You get the sense of that heavy wood plank. There's sort of a wood frame building inside this brick building that was really used to create a secure place to hold prisoners. Moving on to the Confederate monument from 1889. This is a pretty traditional location for a Confederate monument. Usually they were placed in courthouses or in cemeteries with Confederate soldiers. Key issues here is the appearance of the base, stone masonry repointing, cleaning, and looking at installing an interpretive sign. So the appearance of the base, these are all in the same image here because the issues are relatively minor for this small piece. You can see that base, it's kind of blown out in that image, but you can see that it looks cracked, it looks scary, right? It looks like it's unstable. Ultimately, that part of the monument was always intended to be below grade. There was a raised planting bed and then an iron fence around the monument originally, and when the ADA alterations to create a level, accessible path around throughout Court Circle was installed, that actually pushed the grade down below, exposing that base, which wasn't intended to be exposed. And then you can see there's small areas of mortar loss, and then also you can see the green, the biological staining on the in the center image there. And then talking with Robert, I know this is a big site here to come and speak about. It's a great opportunity to interpret history, both the Civil War, years after, when it was installed. There's, it's rife with opportunity. It's also a nice spot to put an interpretive sign to help lay out who built this, why did they build it, all of those things, that could be installed in front of the monument. Looking at the annex from 1957, it's in good shape. So these issues are not particularly significant. The biggest ticket is really going to be a building systems upgrade, which you would expect in any building every 15 to 20 years. But looking at that courthouse restroom in terms of the one that we just that's just right off the breezeway there, making that more safe because you've got that ramp, so it's a tripping hazard. It's also not up to code. And then looking at the second floor offices. So I've kind of combined all these. You can see how that ramp gets in the way of the doorway, creating a potential tripping hazard. In the event of egress, it's not, I would call, a safe arrangement. And then the offices generally just need a refresh plus systems improvement, again, like you'd expect to upgrade any modern building. Moving on to the surrounding landscape around the court circle. Generally, it's in good shape. I mean, the main thing is stopping people from hitting the wall with their trucks and cars, right? I mean, that's one of the biggest things. And so, we suggested perhaps the targeted installation of bollards to help that, as well as just general maintenance of the wall, removing biological growth, meaning like the moss or the green growth that you see on the wall. And then also just general repointing, doing it the right way, using the right kind of mortar to protect the bricks so that the bricks aren't, you want the bricks to be harder than the mortar, right? So the mortar is the sacrificial piece. The bricks you don't want to break because then they're much harder and more costly to replace. Otherwise, maintaining the trees, you've got a lot of big, beautiful trees, keeping them in good health is really important to the beauty of Court Circle, and then also making sure that their root beds don't disturb the foundations of the buildings and create further damage. Stormwater management, you've got kind of a cresting circle landscape, right, that flows down to that wall. And so what happens is that a lot of times water's flowing to that and kind of getting trapped along that wall. It's again, generating that biological growth, creating soft, mushy soils along there. So perhaps finding targeted outlets to help eliminate that stormwater from collecting. Moving across the street over to the 1770 Botetourt building, the foremost architectural historian on Virginia courthouses called this the best preserved colonial tavern in the state. So it really is a jewel. And there's been a number of, over history, there's been a number of additions. And what's so beautiful about the restoration effort is you don't really see those, especially from the front, right? Main Street, it was really returned to its original colonial appearance. However, on the rear, we do really see that, and that's really our first item there, the brick masonry deficiencies. Off to the rear, there were a number of additions over time that have since been infilled and repaired, as well as off to the side. And you see some of the sort of perhaps not longest lasting design decisions that were made as a result of in those previous projects. Accessibility is another major item here, both getting to the porch, but also getting downstairs, and then just generally interior rehabilitation and restoration. So looking at the brick here, you can see some of these repairs, mismatched bricks, cracks moving up, bricks being infilled that aren't the right size. That's on the left-hand image. And then on the right-hand image, you can see this, what I call kind of a cheat of a detail, where they wanted to install these lintels, but they wanted to hide them. And so what they tried to do was install very thin brick units, but of course now those have popped off because they aren't really set into the wall sufficiently. So they've become displaced, and you can see that dark thing just extending past the right-hand side of that window. That's a steel lintel that is heavily corroded and jacked. So when we say jacked, that means the corrosion has gotten to the point that the structure of it has actually expanded. And so that's a major concern in a brick wall, because as that jacks and expands, then all the brick is affected, starts to crack, get displaced, and could really lead to serious structural issues around your openings. Accessibility, I know there was talk, the plans initially about looking at a ramp on this side. I know now a chairlift is going on the other side to be able to get to the first floor. Obviously, even if we get to the first floor, there's no accessibility to the second floor. And then also the rear sunken garden is inaccessible as well. So that severely limits, full access to people to your major museum site. And so I think it's an important thing to consider in the future, how that can be improved. Looking at other interior work, obviously as you enter the first floor, you do not get the feel of a colonial tavern. You see the modern carpet, you see the modern suspended ceiling. So, can there be a long-term project that pursues grants, that really maximizes, this historic resource in a way that evokes that feeling that now the second floor so thoroughly gives you that feel of a colonial tavern. It's really beautiful up there, and the new exhibits are really fantastic. Other issues down in the basement where we've got moisture infiltration, water coming into the building, just general issues around what is really that basement going to be used for. I know there's a number of artifacts down there. Again, all of this goes back to that master plan. What is the vision? How much are you really seeking to bite off, and how can you do it in a sustainable, effective, efficient way? And then generally the landscape surrounding that. The rear sunken garden is a modern addition. There was no sunken garden historically behind the tavern. What it allowed is to really submerge and hide that mechanical and restroom addition that was added to the back of the building. It creates kind of a serene space, but it's clearly lightly used and is really kind of, not a focus. Managing stormwater, both how it affects the basement level in particular, but just generally around the building. How can we get that stormwater away from the building and protect it, and then just maintaining shrubs around it. So that's kind of going through the buildings itself. I could go on and on. Our draft report is about 320 pages, so we are deep into this. So I'm not trying to bore you with all of that, but this is thorough work. We love doing this. We're really passionate about it. This is what we do. And, really being able to encounter these buildings and grapple with the challenges and problems has been a real pleasure. And I hope that this report can serve for the next 10, 20 years. And really, again, our focus is going to be on establishing priorities so that the most important work can be done first, and then that can be augmented by that long-term vision of the master plan. So with that, I'd be delighted to take questions, and I'm happy to continue to expound.
Dr. Orth.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation, and I'm sorry that I missed the tour because of whatever happened to me. But now you mentioned a couple of really unique things about what's here in Gloucester at the Court Circle, but it also, to me, brings to focus a lot of the interesting things of historical significance in Gloucester itself. And, we're the stepchild of that historic triangle. Given all the things that have been talked about, Ware, and all that, and of course watching Ken Burns' movie, The American Revolution, which is kind of really cool. I always think, why wouldn't this be a historic quadrangle than a triangle? Because so much of history has happened in Gloucester, and it goes ignored because of the fact that we live under this, other part. So I don't know whether that will ever happen or not, but we try to push the historic significance of Gloucester. We see people coming here, and of course now with Ware and knowing what's there, Gloucester's got a pretty impressive historical background. That I think we could be doing so much more. How we would ever get past the triangle to a quadrangle, I have no idea. But it's an idea.
Can I say something about that? So you may recall that I mentioned that, I'm trying to remember how many years ago it was, in the Gazette, it was in the 1970s, 1972, Colonial Williamsburg was asked by the Chamber of Commerce to come to Gloucester and look at, could Gloucester become a tourist attraction? That's when we could have become the quadrangle. And the actions never took place. The recommendations, things just didn't happen. And the recommendations that I read from 1972 are pretty much the same ones we've been saying for years. I don't think we are ever going to have the gift of becoming the quadrangle just because we have some great history and it falls down on us. What's going to happen is when the facilities that we have and the story that we have, the investment goes into the sites. So, this picture right there is so beautiful. We made the investment in the lights, very small, but it literally lit up the courthouse where people had never seen it like that. There's so much opportunity here, and if we were to put Gloucester on the map, in a right way with our history, then I think our argument of being included, the necessity of being included would come about. But it's not going to happen without our putting in the effort. And I've kind of been told that by the people from over there too.
I know, I was on the way back from Salem watching my grandson run the state cross-country meet, and I stopped at that rest stop, and of course it hit me, all the stuff about Williamsburg and York County and Yorktown, and I said, God, and there's not one mention of Gloucester and all the stuff that we've had. So anyway, it's kind of a pet thing for me because being on the board for so many years and we've talked about so many neat things about Gloucester, it's a really cool county. I mean, in the history of this country, it has played a big role, and I think it often goes unnoticed.
If I could jump in, one other benefit that you have is that these buildings are not big, right? And so there's a way to do this in a way that it builds, right? You just need to take step by step, and it's achievable in that way. These are not, 5,000 square feet, these 10,000 square feet that you've got to encounter with, the debtor's prison, for instance. I mean, that's a small building, and there's ways to create real impact, make it publicly accessible, activate it, and give people, when they come to the circle, a moment of surprise and excitement, like the work that's being done at the Botetourt building and other ways. So,
sorry, but my last question. So in this report, are there distinct recommendations for each building? What could be done to make it, historically significant?
Well, I mean, they are historically significant, flat out, in terms of, preserving the buildings for the, to maintain them and make them sustainable. Yes, we are making explicit recommendations. For instance, repoint this much square feet, address this issue this many times on each building, so that the cost estimate that's being prepared in concert with it is, and it's being done by a preservation cost estimating firm. It's not being done by just Joe Schmo who does framing out in a subdivision. It's really, these people know what these efforts cost and and we're giving them precise quantities for that work and telling them the nature of the repairs that need to be done.
Well, one thing, we don't have the Rockefeller family to develop Gloucester like Williamsburg did. But I also look at I was getting ready to ask a question, but you just answered it. But if you look at basically a restaurant review, I'm seeing multiple dollar signs because of the group that's going to have to give us price estimates. It's going to be considerably more than what Joe Schmo were to do it. But that being said, based on earlier conversation and what you just presented, do you have any estimate on what it would cost for the debtor's prison to fix that corner to start with?
Sure. So let me pull up. Let me find it real quick.
Well, while Andrew's looking that up, just kind of another point that it wasn't that long ago that we had 5 of the 6 buildings accessible to the public. And we've lost accessibility other than this building and the annex. But we had the Clayton, the Roan, and the debtor's prison open. And the buildings have not been kept up, not in the sense of vacuuming and dusting, but we did some pointing and things, but we haven't done nearly enough. And we didn't want to take another whack at it. And the expense that you're talking about getting the right people, it's true. But if you look at what people did when they put Portland cement in, thinking they were doing the right thing, not using the Jefferson's, mortar mix or whatever that was needed. So it is really a special situation. When I think about a comparison, and when we were talking about tonight's thing, I was like, don't drop the big bomb on them of how much this is going to cost, because I don't want anybody to just shut down, because it is not going to happen overnight. It's going to be piecemeal. But just as a comparison, before he gives that specific one, our county committed $7 million to a transportation center because we needed that transportation center. And I think if you think about not wanting to have these buildings fall apart on your watch, the economic potential that's here, the cultural history of our whole county and all that those kind of things can be just as justifiable as a transportation center. And hint, it's about the same $7 million figure. And that does not include the interpretive, that includes fixing the building. So I'm the spoiler.
That's fine.
But I think, want y'all to know that this is something that's going to be long-term, but we really do. Matt's been putting in the budget these amounts, little bits to do here and there, and so you're going to see more things coming out of in the request in the budget for the items that are the highest to fix.
So estimated for reconstructing that corner and then underpinning, just that one piece is about $95,000. Now, would you do that work in isolation, or would you then take on, the additional masonry work that's necessary? I think, obviously, if you've got a skilled mason on hand, the more you consolidate work, obviously nobody has unlimited funds, but the more you consolidate work, the more efficient your expenses are, because a contractor charges you to mobilize, charges you to leave a site, and your county staff has to pursue those people. You hire somebody to help facilitate, to prepare bid documents. So if you kind of expand it, I'm doing napkin math now, but probably the masonry itself on that building is about double that in total. So you're looking at $180 more or less $1,000 to button up that masonry there. It's a small building, but it's in real danger, and so it's really a challenge, or is it, how do you make that decision? It costs, when I think about it, unfortunately, it costs what it costs, and the question is, do you preserve it or do you not preserve it? And that really is the question.
I mean, based on what you were saying earlier now, that's the building that definitely has to be fixed for collapse.
That's the most urgent kind of sprawling issue. There are urgent moments like in the old jail, that big crack, that one needs attention, but that can be a focus, right? You can do targeted things there. And then I think then after the debtor's prison, this is really where you want to spend the real money, because you cannot lose this 1766 courthouse. It is a real jewel. And so I think, then this is going to be a much bigger one, because you need to think really holistically, and the more you can do dealing with that exterior envelope and then thinking about this, and then does the ceiling need to be done? No, you can do things in phased ways that focus on maintenance and focus on protecting the building first and foremost.
And that's why we put the tiles back up, is we have the small grant that was supposed to do the fake plaster and the new wooden flooring and the hanging lights and I'm forgetting one more thing, flooring, ceiling, lights. But anyway, we stopped all of that, even though we still need to get back to the ceiling. But we've asked, Robert's working with DHR to say what we are going to do is we're going to need to take this wainscoting off. We're going to have to look at that cement kind of covering, and we'll be able to use the grant money. It's not going to be enough, but we are changing the focus of our grant, and that's our 250th portion. So we'll have some funds to help. And if we'd have just kept going with the ceiling, we would have been ignoring a much greater problem.
Well, leaving the museum earlier, someone brought up an interesting point, and I just modified it a little bit, but they were like, why don't we put flags, since it's the Colonial Courthouse, instead of putting current flags, put a colonial flag. But I was sitting there, when we rebuild or when we buy new flags, maybe we ought to put a flag that coincides with when the building was built.
We actually did do that years ago. We looked in that, and I'm not sure what happened to those flags, but there was a little bit of grief of the flags were different for the custodian staffs and different things were happening. But anyway, it was exactly that, like, let's help people know, and there's not that much difference between a couple of the buildings. But I think ideas like that would be very good now. I think sometimes the things we thought of were just a little bit premature, and now I think we're ready for them.
Yes, Mr. Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Got a comment, question. I guess the question first for Ms. Steele. with Ware Wacomico. Is the delay funding? Is it environmental concerns? Is it, what is the holdup that is impeding the development of that federal park?
So I think it's multiple, and now that the government's back open, I'm going to try to get Jerry Marr, who's the superintendent, to come and speak. I had told you all I would ask her, and it was about the same time the government shut down. I wanted to get her through the We the People event, which thank goodness that happened before all that. There's still research going on, and to try and determine what areas are usable. There is a lot of concern about what type of events and what kind of facilities and things that are appropriate to build on what is considered sacred ground. And there's discrepancies, I think, between some of the desires of leaving it just as it is. At the same time, the National Park Service is definitely committed to going forward. There's never enough money, but there's been interest in potentially obtaining additional land that might help where it's not as sacred. One of the things that was discussed, and I think it was at VACO recently, is where I heard it again, but there's different kinds of funding sources that are specific to federal parks, and there's different transportation money that's specifically to that. So I know they were looking at trying to have another road because they have people who have to go into the park to get to their home, and they're trying to change that. So there's things going on, but overall it really goes to the government works very slow on projects like this. It's meticulous. There have been a number of studies that have been done out there. I went out and visited one of them. They brought the equipment in from Europe and did all these things, so looking at the archaeology. So it's going to happen, but I don't think it's going to become what we thought the equivalent of the Jamestown for Gloucester. I don't know that we'll ever have quite that. But it will be a public site.
Yeah. Because I guess my overall comment is, and we've all touched on this before, is that tourism is really one of the missing links in Gloucester's economic development. And when we have such rich history with this court circle, with the Battle of the Hook, with the linkage to Yorktown, then we could become a part of this history tour that people come on. I want to go to Jamestown. I want to go to Williamsburg. Well, what about the Pocahontas' village and Ware Wacomico? I mean, with the fascination about her and that Native American heritage, I think it could be a real boon for our county. But it just seems like this park is just dragging on, and I would love to see it become something, maybe not as big as Jamestown, but certainly something where it could be a destination for our county. And with the concern about overdevelopment, getting those tourism dollars and having people come spend their money and then leave, that's pretty attractive. And I also just want to, just as a note of encouragement, I want to just publicly commend, I'm a member of the Tourism Committee and also the Historical Committee, and I think both of the leadership in those areas are doing a great job. So Matt, with his leadership in the Parks and Rec and the tourism area, and then Susan Ammon and Hunter LeClaire, I think both are doing an outstanding job. We've got a great new logo. Speaking to the rest stops, they've done sort of a pop-up at rest stops to feature our county. I think there's a billboard celebrating the 250th anniversary where we're featured. And so there's just a lot of positive energy and enthusiasm in the tourism area, great social media. So I think the whole tourism department and its leadership should be commended. And then on the history side of things, Robert Kelly is just doing an amazing job. A key part of success of any organization is passion and enthusiasm. And he's got it. And so he really loves history. He's in the right place for the love of history. And there's so many wonderful weekend programs that he's putting on. The second floor of the museum is just been amazing with what he and his team has accomplished with the grant money. So I just want to commend Mr. Kelly for his leadership. So we've got the people in place to continue this movement, but I think I'm rotating off. Dr. Lemming is going to ably fill this seat, and I think that we just, as a board moving forward, need to have a vision, a positive vision of where we can take this county in the tourism arena to really leverage the gifts that we have in this county. So.
Thank you. I couldn't have said it better. I mean, all of y'all are being supportive, but that is exactly, it is the right time. And even with the financial investments of the investigations and the repair work and things, that is a tourist attraction too. Whether it's sponsoring a clinic or whether it's just come and watch the work. I mean, I went to Montpelier when it was being taken apart. It was great. I mean, so we can do a lot, and this goes right into a portion of what you'll hear at the retreat on Saturday, especially looking at the 250th. And for us, what will be very important is the 2031.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Andrew, what I heard Mr. Gibson say is buy something and leave.
Don't worry. I'll do my part.
I'll just also briefly mention through the connections, and I don't even know if you got to see this on the back of the board packet, but when we look at how the building is to be interpreted and what original material we have, besides the brick wall, the next amount of original material we have is in the attic hidden. So having the 3D imaging done so that we can eventually build some models and show people what they cannot see is another really neat part. So.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Supervisor discussion. Any supervisor discussion? No supervisor discussion tonight? No closed meeting? What else do we have left, Mr. Hutson?
Second.
Who's in second? All in favor? Aye. Meeting adjourned.